what I would like to do is to quickly recap some of the thoughts from Tuesday, which was really about a state of mind. Anyone remind me what I was sharing around the state of mind on Tuesday? If someone could just quickly give me a brief recap, and let's see if there's any transference of learning here. Who should I pick on? Um, she's just looking at me directly and she's smiling for me. Yes, exactly. Can you give me a little bit of a recap as to what we discussed on Tuesday, please? Just need you unmuted.
Wow. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I think you spoke about the state of mind on Tuesday. You spoke about quite a lot about how our state of mind can control us, can cause fear, and those fear can cause a lot of problems for us. You talk about quite a lot about the function of brain. I felt like I went back to university. I couldn't even, I was like, oh, Dr. Mike is going to research, recharge, and he's come back with power. yeah. So anyway, you spoke about quite a lot of things, how our state of mind can be, controlled by our brain, and sometimes we need to, what we think in our state of mind manifest in our body physically, emotionally. And you spoke about quite a lot of things that those can cause to damage our body, like a lot of, mental illnesses and a lot of things. I'll just stop there.
Yes. Thank you for me. Brilliant. Thank you. And I'm glad that you think I'm coming back with some power.
Yes, yes.
A 2 week break was good, right? But I think you're right. That's the essence of what we were talking about. And I tried to bring about the two sides or two perspectives of the brain and how it works. And we can call one element the lower side and one the heightened side. And one of the lower side was always there for our safety. If we could go back hundreds of years, thousands of years, where there was that sense of we weren't so civilized, let's use that word, and we had to defend ourselves against animals or other people. In our brains, there was this thing which caused us, in a state of alert, to hanker down and become fearful. And that fearfulness was a warning that there is imminent danger. And so when we became fearful, our brains immediately release chemicals into our bodies. It heightens our heart rate and our blood pressure. And it says blood, get into all of those muscles that can prepare you for flight if necessary, or for fight. It also releases chemicals like cortisol or stress hormones. And some of those stress hormones interfere with our thinking brain because it gives us time to hanker down and then make a decision as to what we do next. So I talked about the scenario where you're walking through the woods and you see something. And when you see that thing, the crude picture that's created in your brain says, whoa, be careful. And your palms may become sweaty, hairs on your arms stand up, you become very cautious, and the side of your brain that deals with that immediate observation says, be fearful. Because this thing looks like a snake. And then that side is called the amygdala. And then the other side of our brain, in that cortex section, the neocortex in that side, starts to process. But because the amygdala has been heightened and highlighted, it then says, be on guard, be fearful, hanker down, be safe. It's better to think of this thing as a snake only to find out it's a stick than to think of this thing as a stick to realize it's a snake. That's our early brain. That's the amygdala. But then when we go into the more sophisticated brain, that thinking side of the brain that gets processing and reasoning and thought and observation, it looks at this thing and it says, it's only a stick. And you sense a sigh of relief, and you may even laugh and think to yourself, oh my gosh, I swear I thought that was a snake. And then you find that the body's coming back to a normal temperature, your sense of reason and rationale is being restored. But in that moment between the two spaces, because the perception and the thinking brain takes a bit longer to process that sense of danger than the immediate instinctive response of the amygdala. So why is it there? It creates a sense of fear, prepares the body for fight or flight. But I also mentioned last week that many of us get stuck in that state, and we don't have the wherewithal or the environmental conditioning or the information or the experience to push our minds to observe that this is just not what I initially thought it was. It's only a stick. And so many of us have these situations where sticks become serpents in our lives, and we believe it. So let's go on a bit more. I'm going to go back to it's probably not the right word, but I think those of you who could critique me could understand where I'm coming from. Let's go back to that primitive brain, that instinctive brain, the one that prepares you for your safety. There's another side of our brain called a hippocampus, and that hippocampus is where a lot of the thought and reasoning takes place. I'm going to give you an example of how powerful our brains are, how wonderful this body really is. The hippocampus has the ability to reason, to regulate thought, to perceive. But the amygdala usually is based on an emotion. And that emotion can override the brain's ability to reason. I think some of you can see where I'm going. So the question is, where did these emotions come from? Can they be healed? Can they be corrected? Or is it just what it is? Is it an environmental thing? Is it a cultural thing? Is it a traditional thing? Is it a way of collected beliefs that now inform this behavior? Or is it just, that's my lot in life? So, okay, let's amplify this. And I think it's safe to say it as it is. Let's assume there's a child who, okay, let me go back a bit. Scientists believe that the hippocampus, the reasoning, the thinking side of the brain, is not fully developed or not in a state of active, full-on development until after the age of 3. That's one of the reasons why the majority of us, if not all of us in this room, cannot remember what happened to us before the age of 3. Some of us can just about remember when we started primary school, but we can't remember vividly anything that happened to us before the age of 3 because our hippocampus hadn't been developed. So let's say there's a child who suffered physical abuse with the beating by a belt under the age of 3. Here's something really powerful for you to observe. Under the age of 3, let's say a parent or someone was inflicting this torture on this child, and this child is 1.5 years or 2. The child cannot necessarily remember the instances, but because the amygdala is more developed at an earlier age, an emotion can be formed. And that emotion can start to influence the thinking modality. So later on in life, that child might see a belt, go into a sense of hysteria, panic, anxiety, stress, and not know why. That is the powerful thing. You don't know why you're in that state. But the emotions have been formed and connected to trauma. We call it a traumatic memory. It's happening. But don't ask me to articulate it. What is happening? I just know I'm experiencing this sense of trauma and my body's responding to something and I don't know why. But it could be that fear could be developed a lot broader so that that child becomes afraid of the belt. It may become afraid of the animal skin that belt is. But then it might be afraid of authority. It might be afraid of someone that reminds them of their parent. That child may go up to be afraid of the police. And yesterday we talked about complex grief and how other things could be at work, which is causing you to be in a state of mind and you have no idea why your behavior is to what it is. So this is not good versus evil. This is not necessarily either a character situation. It's an emotion at work, but we're not intelligent enough to figure it out. Now that's in that scenario where some trauma took place to a child pre the age of 3. So now what if that trauma takes place to that child during that emotional intelligence period of their life between 7 and 9 typically, but let's say 6 to 11. Yeah. But now they've got this conscious awareness of what's possibly taking place. And this is where this wonderful word, beautiful word called feelings come into it. And I want to try and distinguish and differentiate the difference between feelings and emotion, because it's often used interchangeably and they are two distinct things. Let me explain that. Okay. All right, let me go to some notes. I've not been using my notes. Yeah, so feelings, emotions versus feelings. Let's see. Yes, as I said, people see them as very much the same thing, but they are not. They are closely related, but they are distinct instances. So emotions are a lower level response occurring in the brain. It's a powerful response. And someone said, I think it was Ricky said, it's possibly the most powerful thing in the universe. But it's a lower level response that occurs in the brain. And those responses create biochemical and electrical reactions in the body that alters the body's physical state. You may see a frown on a face, you may see a smile, you may see someone fearful, you may see someone courageous. It alters the body. So technically speaking, emotions are simply this: neurological reactions to an emotional stimulus. If someone says something funny and you find it funny, your brain says it's funny and you respond by laughing or chuckling or smiling. It's an emotional stimulus. Something stimulates that emotion which causes you to respond. But then back to the other side, that amygdala again. It plays a key role in the emotional arousal. It can release neurotransmitters, connectivity in the hippocampus, in that thinking side of the brain. And that area is what is associated to memory. That's why emotional memories are much stronger and longer lasting. When there's an emotion attached to a memory, it's much stronger and longer lasting. You start to remember and attach more details to that emotive state. So what are feelings? So whilst emotions are associated with bodily reactions that are activated through neurotransmitters and hormones released by the brain, feelings are the conscious experience of emotional reactions. Interesting. It's what you have become aware of, and you associate that emotion and says, oh, that emotion makes me feel like this. But this is where it gets messy. Because if we don't know how that emotion got there because we weren't articulate enough or intelligent enough to know where that emotion has come from, we can realize that the emotion can have significant power over us. And you then just say, it's my character, it's my behavior, that's how I am. And we've not been able to fathom out why. So an emotion is a feeling is it's your conscious association to an emotion, that emotional reaction. Because you have an emotional reaction, you can define it, and we call that thing feelings. So here's where it gets tricky. There's two sides to our memory: the conscious memory and the unconscious memory. And I bet you can guess where they both sit. The conscious memory is in your hippocampus. The unconscious memory is in your amygdala. One's instinctive. One is there for a reason. And then the other side processes the reason. But usually the emotion can be stronger and more influential than the thinking. But the answer's in the tin. The answer's on the tin. Okay, let's look at this There's a saying, I think, therefore I am. And the good book says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. So there is a possibility to override an emotional state by rewiring thinking. But guess what? You have to observe the emotional state, and you may have to do some professional work to understand what's really taking place. Here's a saying, it might not be a devil or a demon or a deacon. It just could be just how neurochemicals work in our body. And then we get a greater level of perception. So who can help you fathom out how you rewire your brain? A counselor can. A psychotherapist can. It may be time that, and this is not patronizing, it may be time that you don't do a takeaway and spend some money on a psychotherapist. To understand you. If you know yourself, you can do greater work. You can do greater exploits. But if you don't know you and you've just accepted it as your lot, then life's vicissitudes will throw you up and down and keep you discombobulating as often as the days come by. And you are not in control. You're not even aware. So then, I reckon, I'm going to put money on it, most of you in this room who are from an Afro-Caribbean background understands the concept of a belt. How much trauma has it caused you? What has it wired you to become? Spare the rod, you spoil the child. Too much rod, you may spoil the child. Because our brains have emotions. And they're there for a reason. But how much of your emotions are controlling your thinking patterns? Ricky said, do our brains control us or do we control our brains? I think he went into my notes. Are we thinking about what we're thinking about, or are we just responding to chemicals in our body that our brains are making? I'm not saying substance abuse. I'm not even saying poor thinking. I'm just saying in our innate nature, there is a reason why we fear. But have we been so locked into this thing called fear that we can't progress? We can't think outside of our box. The fear is so loud, and we've associated a feeling to that fear, and it's become our friend. It makes us anxious, makes us nervous, makes us feel like we can't, and we shouldn't even try. Because if you look back at my life from day dot, that's how I am. And we become strong and wrong. So today, before I come to my closing, I want to open up this session a bit more to understand a bit about memory trauma. Because it's affecting all of us. Some of us, all right, I don't really give a monkeys about this statement. Some of us are disguising our identity in false spirituality. Passing it on as if, I heard someone say it yesterday. It was brilliant how she put it. Just, hand it to God and he'll take care of it. But what are you handing to God? Are you even aware? Are you conscious? Maybe you can. But how much have you probed into it? What do you understand about your own brain? What's really taking place? What can be rewired? Can you be that thinking person? So it comes to a point where you should be able to investigate an emotion, figure out, why is it there? Sometimes, most of the times, they're there for a valid reason. What can you correct? Can anything be corrected? Are we just pretending? Are we hiding those inner things and putting on a brilliant face to everybody else? Or are we looking at it, recognizing it's not necessarily right or useful, and making an effort to change it? I believe that most of us, if not all of us on these sessions, are here because we want to change some of this stuff, especially the dark stuff that we don't talk about to anyone else. So we're looking for answers. We're looking for strategies on how we can have a sense of reasoning versus instinct. But understanding that instinct is there for a reason. Are we using our brains? Are we managing ourselves? Do we understand the power that we have in our minds? Do you see why parenting, especially under 3-year-olds, is important? Giving a child the best start. They say the first 1,000 days of any life is the most important, because it allows the formative parts of our brain to develop. Of course, the rest of our bodies too, but that's where we're learning. That's when our programming takes place. That's when our psychology and our belief systems are developed. Just remember this, I've said this in previous sessions. How much of your belief system have you actually chosen to take on? Or were they traded down to you, traditions? Were they passed on to you? Because I'm sure you didn't name yourself. I'm sure you didn't choose your first primary school. I'm sure you didn't choose the dress or the trousers you wore for the first time, or the food you ate, or the siblings that you're a part of, or the family you were born in, or the country you were born in. But now that we didn't have much of a say, especially up until the age of 5, what now? Is there any trends that we can change? Is there anything we should be looking at and reviewing? And stop pretending. Yesterday, our beloved Fiona talked about grief. Are we letting grief take its course? Or are we pretending we're all right? And yet our emotions are pulling at us and eating us away. But we stand in a posture of perfection. It's contrary. It's contrary. So let's have a conversation this morning. Let's have a conversation. Let's be honest. Let's talk. Because when we look at some of these things, we look at cultural challenges. We look at it and we think, oh my gosh, if something doesn't change, the next generation is not going to be equipped. You know, there's a saying I heard when I went to South Africa. Receiving something, holding it in good care, and passing it on in a better state than you found it. Imagine that's your own life. Can you take care of your life and leave you as a soul in a better state? Something to think about. All right, so hope it makes sense. I've got loads more notes. We could go talking about the brain for another 100 years, and we're still figuring it out. Just remember, the hippocampus is your active thinking side. Your amygdala deals with a lot more of those emotions and instinct. creates fear for your protection. But if you now start endorsing that fear and believing that fear and accepting that fear, it's going to debilitate your life. All right? So your amygdala also deals with your unconscious emotional memory. Your hippocampus deals with your conscious emotional memory. So what is happening to you that you're not aware of? Have you ever paid attention to that? Have you ever figured out why? Let's have that conversation. I can see this guy. He's just looking at me quite calm and collected, you know, pulling on his chin. Used to have a beard last week. But Uncle Ricky, could you help us here, please? Could you start us off with a thought? Just help us with a thought.
Good morning, Mike. Good morning, everybody. I think it's a sensitive subject, and I think it's one that's gonna, I'm hoping today, allow us just to be a little bit open in terms of how do we actually cope with some of the things that you've been sharing. And I'm wondering whether part of the challenge to us is because we don't see enough. I don't know what it's like in terms of like the male and female split, but my observation from a kind of a male-female perspective is that men tend to be more insular in terms of how they process and reflect. There's a lot more internalization that goes on. And I'm wondering whether part of the challenge is because we don't allow ourselves to, for whatever the reasons might be potentially to shame, guilt, perception, to actually talk to others about how we actually feel. And I think part of what you were saying earlier about whether it be an approach to counseling or to have a psychotherapist or a pastor, you know, somebody from faith as well to join you on your journey, is do we have the confidence to be able to firstly confess our thoughts one to another? And I think that's part of the challenge, is that in order for us, I think, to be well, I think we need to have a conversation. And I think sometimes the worst conversation we have is the one that we keep having with ourselves. And it's not always a bad one. I think it's good. You can take some time out to self-reflect. You know, you can process your thoughts by the end of the day. How did I feel? Is there something I look back and I think, well, actually, today didn't go so well, and what might have been the contributing factors? Was it something you contributed to? But I think sometimes what we don't do is we don't reach out to others when we really need help. And sometimes it's hard because we might not see in that moment or in that time that actually we do need help. I think the one thing I'd like to share, Mike, you've been talking kind of about fear, in between the golden weave of fear. And I mean, I'd like to share one thing, and then perhaps, I don't know, maybe an opportunity to hear from others how other people deal with fear and their approach to it. And I guess in the spirit of vulnerability, I'll just share with you kind of some of the things, one or two things which I had to deal with a couple of years ago around fear. And I was afraid to die. And look, it's not the most uplifting subject to talk about right now, but I did. It was I was almost it was a sense of worry and anxiety. This idea that actually one day, you know, I have an expiration date on this physical container that I live in, and I started to kind of dwell on this fear of actually might that day come sooner than I wanted to. But then what I actually started to do was I started to actually have a conversation with the fear. I had to learn to actually look fear in its eyes and to confront it. And to be honest with you, I couldn't do it on my own, and I needed some help. And so I reached out to a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine who's from my faith church ministry. But it was good because it was someone to talk to. And the kind of journey that we went on was to help me to, I think, better understand what were the root causes. Why did I start to feel that way? And when I did, what sort of conversation was I having with myself? And often, I think you mentioned it earlier, Mike, you know, I think you said, as a man thinketh in his heart or mind, so is he. And I think, yes, absolutely, we start to, you know, where the mind goes, the man follows, or as there's other expressions that say, you know, he that is in control of the mind is in control of the man or the person or the woman. So I had to get better at asking for help when I knew that there were some things I couldn't process, I couldn't understand for myself. And even today, you know, in the midst of hearing so many people that have tragically passed away, as a result of the recent crisis of COVID, and just people through ill health who have passed away, you know, that you talked about the anchoring, the effect of, you know, you might smell something and it takes you back to a point in time or a place. And for me, I'm reminded of a time when I lost 3 people very close to me, and they died in front of me. 2 of them actually, I saw them flatline as I was holding their hand, and I think that's where my fear stemmed from, is because I'm always taken back to that moment in point, and that moment in time. And I carried that with me for a long time, unconsciously. I think you talked about the conscious and unconscious. And it's only recently, again, through COVID, that some of the conversations I've started to have those again around death. And I've had to go back to my practice. And my practice was I had to sit with my fear and confront it and talk to it and remind myself that actually I do have a choice in terms of how I'm choosing to feel. And I've got better at reaching out to people just to share my thoughts. I think there's an expression that says, you know, is it a thought shared is a problem shared is a problem halved, or something along those lines, you know. And so that's been kind of my journey recently. And COVID has kind of just reminded me, I guess, the fragility of life, but at the same time, the associations, I've had to work harder to try and break them. You know, we observe so much passing away, so much tragedy and grief and loss, and it can be really overwhelming, almost like a tsunami. And so I've had to kind of sit with the tsunami and talk to it, and almost have a conversation. And the conversation for me has actually been, I know it will happen to me one day, but up until then, you know, my best life is now. And it wasn't an easy conversation to have, but what it's meant is that I've become more conscious of the conversations I'm having, rather than trying to push deeper down, you know, the thoughts and feelings, because actually all I'm doing is suppressing the inevitable. You know, I'm just suppressing the seeds, and it's only going to take perhaps another crisis, maybe a tragedy more closer to home, for those seeds to take root and overwhelm me. So I think it's been, you know, to conclude in what I'm saying is, my thoughts, Mike, is that I think maybe if we got better at confessing our thoughts one to another, and I appreciate that takes vulnerability, it takes trust, then maybe we can start the journey of healing.
Thank you so much, Ricky, for sharing and your vulnerability. I think it helps when you've started the conversation, and I'm sure there's many people in this session who agrees with you or have experienced that same sort of fear. You know, these sessions are effectively known as a family conversation. So I'm going to ask Auntie Fiona. Auntie Fiona, Madhu has shared something quite interesting in the chats, and she said, let me read it. It says, helplessness experienced as a child stays with us. I agree with that. but there may be some management systems we could put in place. Auntie Fiona, what's your thoughts on that? Just need you unmuted. Yeah.
There you go.
There you go.
Good morning, all. Thank you. Hi, Habida. Thank you, Mike. Ricky, thank you so much for sharing what you've just said a while ago. I commend you for taking that step and facing down really what has been hovering over you. And totally agree with what Madhu has said, and that's in line with what Ricky has shared. There is a sense of helplessness that overwhelms us when we think of something that is clearly bigger than us, that is possibly beyond our reach even, and we see it as beyond our control. But it isn't necessarily completely beyond us. And what really we need to do, as I put in the notes there, is have a conversation. You have the conversation with yourself, as in, what's going on here? Where is this sense of feeling that I'm getting through? I'm experiencing. And if possible, have somebody trustworthy, emphasis on the trustworthy, that you can talk it through with. Thing about it is, as Mike has pointed out, our experiences as children are always going to be vague, always going to be supported by other people's perceptions, because we're hearing it secondhand. And while we might relive the actual experience, the memory of it will be very reliant on what we are told. And sometimes that clashes with what we remember, what we hear, and what we feel. Fear is an extremely powerful emotion, and it's something that we need to have a healthy respect for, very healthy respect for, because it does protect us. And the fear that we have experienced as a child carries through to adulthood, just as you've explained very well, Mike. So the helplessness that comes with that fear that we felt as children will just wash over us as adults, and we won't have a clue as to why we suddenly can't do what seems very possible to everybody else, or we can't think straight, or we can't take a step forward because we're locked into a memory that we don't even know about. And the only way you can tackle that, the only way you can pick that apart and face it down and remove the power, is to go back with professional help, to go back and sort through your memories and try and, as best as you can, just figure out what the root cause is, what the foundation is. And then you can you go back to move forward. Otherwise, you remain stuck. And a lot of people don't like counseling. They don't like therapy because they think they're being manipulated. They have a number of opinions. And unfortunately, people of faith have a particular dislike or distrust of counseling. And that's something that I get faced with very often, that as people of faith, you shouldn't need counseling. It's against what is Christianity, which actually isn't true. The Lord was a counselor. His name is Counselor. So it's something that's naturally something some people are gifted with. So, just as you believe in the word that is given out from your leaders, you should also recognize that counselors are there to provide the very same support, the same type of support that you can get from your religious leader. in a different form. And when you trust your counselor, and this is supplemented with prayer from your religious leaders, you get a wholesome package and you're completely protected. And going down that path where you need that protection, to protect, to deal with the strongholds, to deal with, you know, whatever comes up, because you have no idea how this memory, this root cause, how it has controlled you and what it has brought to you. So you need that support to shed it and be free, so you can be who you're meant to be. Didn't actually mean to preach there, Mike, I'm sorry.
No, actually, brilliant. Thank you for that. Thank you, Fiona. It's powerful because, you know, what I'm realizing is that some of these childhood situations, when they choose to play out, you have no control over it. It could be at your 18th, your 21st, your 25th, you know, it could be in your midlife crisis. It could be after the kids have grown up and you're sitting at home and you're thinking, what have I done with my life? And I wish I took control over the control earlier. And so what we're trying to do here is say, we are interested in your complete well-being, how you think, how you live in order to be well. And some of those things need a nudge. And if at the end of today's session you say, you know what, I need to speak to someone, I want to be the first one to say, well done, because it's part of your life, part of your transition, part of your development. And it's very much worth it. So let's go back to this bit about things that happen to us that we're not even aware of. How can we then blame ourselves? But most of us do, right? We're, oh, I'm this and I'm that. And we start off with the negativity because our behavior might be negative. So we package ourselves as bad, or we're inadequate or inferior, and we don't know why. Displacement. Yesterday, again, Fiona talked about generational grief. Who's thought of that? Sometimes we behave in a particular way because we heard the stories of our parents. And it was true for them, but is it true for you? It's for you to decide. But we've created a culture that even then we want to pass on to our children based on our parents' experience. And it can cause serious emotional trauma because there's that cognitive dissonance. There's something that we don't agree with, but we still find ourselves pushing forward with, thinking it's the right way. I would love to hear from Steve Gardner. How are you this morning, Steve? Just some thoughts. When we find ourselves anxious and stressed or frustrated or very angry, and it could be because of grief. It could be because of trauma. It could have been because of lack of opportunity. I tell you what, there's people who are shopaholics. And the only reason why they're shopaholics is because they didn't have things when they were younger. There's some people who are clinically obese today because they were starved as children. This is no joke. Steve, good morning to you. How are you this morning?
Morning, man. How did I know you were going to call me?
I saw you looking at me, that's why.
I'm doing good. It's very interesting, funny, because at the same time, I've just been making some notes because I operate in this field as well. Sermon notes I'm making, actually, because of the mind. I oftentimes, in most of my pieces, I always talk about the mind and unraveling the mind. Just as you were talking, this is from nowhere, from nothing. And it's funny how I attended a service some years ago with LL Ministries, and they were talking, and I was kind of just baiting it because I was thinking, oh, this is not real, all of this stuff they're talking about. So I kind of went up in the line just to test it, more not to test it that it was real, but to prove that it wasn't real. And I went there, and when they got to me, they said, and it wasn't like our Holy Ghost services, you know, when the power of God comes down and slam dunk, everybody's falling out all over the place, learned behavior. It was very quiet. They had music playing in the background. It was just talking to me very softly. And they just asked me to talk. And I just started to talk. And then some strange things started coming out my mouth that I've never really talked to anybody about. When I was a young child, I used to get this dream in one of our old houses with my parents, that when everyone left the room and I was left on the sofa, there was these like mummies would grow behind the chair, and they would all come for me. And I was always escape when somebody would come in the room, and they would always just about come in the room, and that was my salvation. And it never meant anything to me for my whole life. And when you're talking about trauma that happens in our early years, and we have no idea of connecting the dots, what they mean. It's just that when something happens later on in life, it has an effect, and we don't know why it has an effect, but there's something that's happened. And when I spoke about this, I didn't even know where it came from. Why would I be talking about it in this way? And then I also mentioned about I had migraine headaches when I was 9 years old and so forth. And I've had every prophet, apostle, bishop, pastor pray for me. And it's still here. And then I understand where Paul says, you know, this was one to buffet me, to humble me, to keep me. So I understand that everything is not going to be prayed away. Some things are going through a process. And then when you talk about that, we have to have this unraveling of the mind, this new mindset, trained mind and so forth. It was funny because when they started to pray for me, they started saying something. They said, when we pray for you, it's going to come out on your breath. It was like, what are you talking about? And they prayed for me. Robert, I'm telling you, no Holy Ghost power service convention where everything was raging was more powerful than that moment there. And I felt something leave me. But it was because of what they talked about before. And I baited it because I was like, this ain't real, man. The only way we can get these things, you know, is when someone's throwing their hands on you, banging you down, and they're sweating, and you're rolling on the floor and shouting and going in a frenzy. But it is so true that the unraveling of the mind, I wrote down, our early years are the most impressionable ones. Hence why when trauma has been introduced, they have an indelible effect on our lives long term. And the Lord, as the lady just said, Fiona, the Lord's name is Mighty Counselor. And that's why we need to be able to be spoken to unravel the confusion of the mind. Because until we have that, we're going to be stuck in the congestion of what's going on in life. I'll stop there.
Wow. Thank you, Steve. Wow, 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 wow. Did you ever figure out what the mummies were?
No, but it's what you said. You can't sometimes understand, put the dots together, but something has happened.
Yes.
And you just know that you wanted deliverance, but I didn't even remember. I don't talk to no one, never spoke to anybody about it until that moment. I came up there and it just came out. And I think it was a deliverance moment because I probably would have never said anything to anyone about it.
Yes. Wow. It's powerful. I mean, Fiona's put in this chat, dreams are very powerful indicators of events past. We should pay more attention to them. And if you think about a young child, their imagination is so vast. They can create stories in 20 seconds. They're vivid. And then they have dreams. They're sometimes much more sensitive to that realm than we are because we rationale everything. And I'm just wondering what has shaped our lives to be the way we are. What can we do? Is there any hope? Can we shift and be better? Is thinking positively enough? Because I'm all for positive thinking. But what else is required to really promote our well-being? Dr. Yasid, are you available to at least give us a couple of sentences, if you can? Good morning to you, Doctor.
Hi. Wow. Um, wow. It's been amazing listening to everyone speak today, especially when Ricky was talking about his fear, which is something I can relate very much to. But I guess the mind is there's I can't remember who it was that said it. I think some American minister said the mind is a battlefield. And there's so many things that, I don't know if everyone can hear me, my internet connection isn't the best, but there's so many things that we deal with in our minds that we sometimes can't articulate with our words. I know that for me, I am one of those adults with a very childlike, vivid imagination that can take in so many things during the day that I'm not even aware of. And I always talk to Auntie Fumi about how I try to guard what I watch, because anything that I see, if I don't filter it, can play and build into something else. And just listening to the talk today has just made that very, very, it brought that to the forefront of my mind about how we need to be very in tune with our minds and find ways, as well as dealing with things that have happened in the past, but also moving forward in the future, be very mindful of those things that we take in, because sometimes we might take in things unconsciously that, like you said, it's gone into that amygdala, and we might not really be able to rationalize it from a hippocampus point of view, but then you deal with something and you react in a way and you're like, where did that come from? And it might not necessarily be something from our past, it might be something from our present that we haven't shielded ourselves with. I'll tell you a very, very, very funny story. The Malaysian airline that crashed many years ago, that the plane hasn't still been found. I remember I never used to watch Lost, the TV series. I would walk past it in the background. I wasn't really into it. But for some reason, I didn't realize that had registered in my mind. So when that Malaysian crash happened, I started having dreams related to Lost, the TV series. So I would wake up going, oh, and I had to sit down and go, this is why my brain is linking the two, the TV series and what's happening in real life. And it was a very weird thing, but it's something that I always remember, that our mind, we need to protect our minds. We need to protect what we take in, even today, as well as what has happened in the past. But we need to be very mindful, because there's some things that we might not in our conscious pay attention to, but our unconscious takes hold of. And we just need to be very mindful of that. Yeah, that's just what I want to say.
Dr. Yassidi, so if someone comes into your practice and is challenged with mental health, and the World Health Organization says that the biggest disease burden on the planet in 2020 is going to be mental health issues. And some of those are unconscious, some of them are currently active, thinking mind space. If someone comes to you and says, listen, I'm feeling down, I'm feeling depressed and so on, is your first response to then say, well, maybe you should have some antidepressants? Or do you try and listen and then third party then refer with conviction? Or what's your approach? Because I think many of us would like to hear what the NHS is thinking and so on.
Oh, I often say to my patients when they ring me and they want in medication, I'm like, sorry, you've come to the wrong doctor. because I've had to deal with close members of my family that have suffered with mental health, depression and anxiety especially. And it's something that is a very present thing in my day-to-day life, both professionally and personally. I give this analogy to my patients. If you've got a wound and you just put a plaster on it, the wound is still there, but everyone else sees the plaster and thinks it's okay. But you need to deal with whatever is causing the wound. So if it's, you need to clean it out or you need to stitch it, what you need to deal with it and not just put a plaster on it. And I often say to people that medication is good, it has its role, but it shouldn't be the first thing that people go for. I often advocate talking, finding, you know, a counselor or, you know, someone that you trust, that you can confide in, but also seeking professional help. My husband has often said to me a few times whether I should do a course on counseling just from a GP point of view, because we don't often have time to counsel and we're not trained counselors. But because of the amount of mental health problems out there, we're usually the first port of call. And a lot of my colleagues are trying to find ways to support people whilst they're getting the professional help. But out there, the general consensus is, I need medication. I'm feeling low. I need medication. I need medication. And when people come to speak to me and I ask, is there anyone you've spoken to? There, oftentimes the first answer is no. And it's then trying to encourage them, you know, to ask, who is there? Is there someone that you trust, you know, that you can confide in first, so that you have someone that is not necessarily professional, but someone that is, you know, there's in Nigeria we often say like your personal person, that you know that whilst things are going on, if you are losing it, they can call you to one and say, okay, you're losing it now. But talking, you know, talking therapies, professional talking therapies, having someone you can call up and say, look, this is how I'm feeling, is so important. And sometimes we belittle that because we often think, no, everyone has to be, you know, I've got it all together, but no one has it all together. And it's always trying to encourage people to try and key into that. And often giving them like, if you're really struggling, you know, the doctor is here, call your doctor, but know that there is no weakness in talking or crying for help. Actually, it's a show of strength, and it's trying to encourage that. And it's even more difficult with men, because they ring and they're like, oh, I can't tell this person this and I can't tell that person that. But it's, I often find it really humbling when, you know, you find this 50-year-old strong man in front of you and he's crying about how he's feeling. And for me, often thinking, okay, Lord, I have to be in a position to encourage and lift this person's head up to say, okay, this is okay, that's fine, but you can step forward and you can build on this, and you're not weak for having this feeling or having this emotion. And just speaking as one particular gentleman that comes to mind that I was so glad months later when he came back to see me and said, thank you so much for not giving me medication. You know, since going on his counseling course, he's doing yet another one. And he's now thinking when he gets back to work, speaking to the other men he works with to say, look, man, we need to talk about how we're feeling, because it's talking, you know, medication. Yes, it's the plaster. And sometimes you need it, but not without dealing with the wound underneath.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Yassini. Thank you for contributing. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much. Yeah, can we, you know what we haven't done today? We haven't really been given a lot of hand claps and thumbs up, but I think we should start that again. I love it. Okay, thank you. We've got Bishop Brooks, and just before I go to Bishop Brooks, I'm just wondering if there's anyone else in the session who's from a medical background, maybe nurses or talking therapists. I know about Fiona. Is there anyone else? Could you just give me a thumbs up or something if you're a nurse or in a medical? For me, you're a nurse, yeah. Anyone else? Who have we got? Okay, for me, I think I'll come to you after Bishop Brooks, yeah? All right, I just want to hear some perspectives on how we manage, because you know what? There's a song, we're all in this thing together. We're all in it together. There's no one here who couldn't improve, all right? So whatever you find yourself, if there's some serious improvement that needs to be done, let's start today. If you're doing very well, maintain it. Bishop Brooks, good morning again. Thank you for joining us. I know you're normally in the faith leaders session, but you see, you came into the right one today, right?
Yeah, I'm intrigued to listen because I am a learner, natural learner. And I was born in Jamaica. My parents left. One left when I was 1 year old. One left when I was 1 year, 6 months. And my grand reared me. So I had no father in my life, no real male of substance in my life. And so I learned a lot by observing. I'm a visual by nature. And so I learned to deal with my issues. For example, when they told me I was coming to England, now I had 9 siblings here. So I'm one that I've not seen before coming in this country. So when I arrived in England, my grand told me before I leave Jamaica, he says, when you go to England, please be a good boy for your parent. I wasn't bad anyway, but anyway, that stuck in my mind. And, I came to England and I said, whatever happens, I'm going to be a good son to my parent. I came and I decided to fit in. I don't care what happened, I'm going to fit in. And there are issues along the line amongst parents and siblings, but I've learned before coming to England how to master my emotion and share what I want to share in a calm way. I never shouted, I never have to get angry first. I can speak to a person and say, this is what I'm feeling, or I think you've hurt me, or whatever. And over time, since that time, I've done a lot of counseling courses and so forth to help me to understand better. But now, the point I want to raise now, I discovered, in the church has damaged a lot of people unknowingly because of emphasis in one-dimensional approach. For example, we love to say, confess your sins, confess your sins. But that's one segment of confession. But a man or a woman, a child or woman should be able to confess, I am feeling this way, I don't know what to do. Or when I was growing up, I've been through this situation here and I'm still hurting now. Because if folks don't confess the things they're experiencing, they've gone through, they've been hurt by, and been, whatever the case may be, that will stay in them and cause damage later. Now, study shows, a research has been done in America to suggest one of the main reasons why the BME having so many issues health-wise, and why the coronavirus, COVID-19, is impacting us so much, it is because of all the years of hurtings from great grandparent to your parents. And even till now, if you go into a shop, certain shops, the black man or black woman, they are more likely to watch you with camera or a person walking around. You see, it brings back that thing on your head. You go to the next place, you go for a job, you don't get a job. Promotion doesn't come. All these things are impacting on the people. So my take on this is, we have to, I suppose, reconsider even counseling. How do we counsel? Because there's some hurts we inherited through genetics that linger onto us. And these things has to be confronted and eradicated. Hebrews 4, I think, verse 15 says, Jesus Christ been through all the things we've been through, but never sinned. Why? Because he mastered his emotion. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Bishop Brooks. And what I really like about what you said is to recognize that even as a church leader, we may not have got it right. And some work to be done. And I think I'm privileged that we can have these sort of conversations here so we can look around how we transform our lives and how we can improve the lives of those that we serve. So I know for me is a nurse, and let me see, I'm sure, no, it wasn't a juror. Okay. Any other nurses? For me, in the meantime, if you could just tell us how you deal with people who you may observe are suffering emotionally, but you're seeing the physical impact. Tell us.
Thank you. For me, most of the patients that I see, they wouldn't just naturally come to me like yesterday and tell me we've got problem. You've got to notice it. And the only way you can notice it is the way you act, you behave to them. So if you're very nasty to them, you wouldn't even get anything from them. So you've got to have a good attitude and treat them nice, then they can be able to open up to you. So one of my goals as a nurse during, throughout the time that I've been working is to treat people like the way I would treat my family, the way I would treat my dad, my mom, my uncle, and everything. And from there, people can open up to me. I mean, some people would display that depressive thing quickly, but most of my patients wouldn't. But from you being nice to them and doing your job nicely, because we as nurses, we've got this culture that we just label people. We don't know what they're going through. We just say, oh, that woman is nasty. That woman is moody. I don't do that. I just look at you and do my job and just be nice to you. And most of the time, then people open up and tell me exactly the way they are feeling. Then I'll be able to ask them, do you have support? Most of them, they live by themselves. They don't have people in their life. So I'll be able to sort out something for them, maybe refer them to the social services or get help for them. Or if they need a counselor, or refer them back to people like yesterday, to do some great job with them. And so it's not just my patients as well that I have to deal with, my colleagues as well. They're the massive one. A lot of them go through a lot of things. And then they come to work and they pass that on to other people. And you just have to realize this is not normal. This is not what she was. This is the way she used to behave, and this is not good. And you have to have that talk. And for me as a Christian, they all know me as a Christian at work, and they will listen to me and they will come and share a lot of problems with me. And my first thing is for them to seek help. Like everybody said, it's good to seek help, because like Ricky says, the problem that is shared is solved. So that's where people have problems. People don't like, but for people, what I believe, for people to be able to share their problem with other people, it depends on that relationship that you have with them, because not everybody wanted to share everything. But if you are nice to most of the patients, most of the colleagues, they will want to come to you and share something. And getting a counselor, getting a help is really important. But it's one of the things that is lacking, that I find out lacking as a nurse. There is no enough psychologists, there is no enough help there. But that's one of the things I'm hoping that the government will invest in, because a lot of people are suffering underneath, and not a lot of people go to church. But I think that needs sorting out. But for me, that's the only way I help my patient. Just basically help them to talk, help them to find whatever help they need, and just be there for them.
Fantastic. Thank you for me. And I can understand why people would open up to you. Very warm and engaging. Thank you. So years ago, as the Institute of Wellbeing, we used to do a lot of counselling courses, introductory counselling skills and so on. And we've done it with a lot of faith leaders, and the take-up has been quite phenomenal. Currently, we're working on a new version, so it can be digital. And it's more of the introductory things that Fumi was just talking about, asking the right questions, befriending, referring with conviction, showing congruence, mirroring, some of the techniques that you need to make people engage. And then when someone does share all that information, what do you do with it? Knowing how, where to put it, and so on. And I think if there's anyone that wants to get a refresher or so on, just send me an email, let me know you're interested, and we will serve. All right. Auntie Queen, good morning to you. Good morning. I haven't spoken in a long time. How are you this morning?
I'm laughing. Dr. Mike, you're calling me Auntie Queen. It's all nonsense fault. Nonsense. It's her fault who calls me Auntie. Now everybody's calling me Auntie now. Good morning, everybody. I'm just commenting, just listening to what other people are saying. I'm one of the people who used to have a lot of mood swings and not knowing what's the problem, what's going on. I did a psychology course some years ago, and I learned some few things, but I didn't take them to me personally. It was just a course. I did it just to pass. But after I started attending the Wellbeing Cafe, there are a lot of things that I picked for myself. And I personally took a step for asking for help. I wouldn't say I was depressed, but I will say my moods were up and down. I didn't know why. And not that I'm at the better stage, at the perfect stage, but I'm at the better stage because I took steps and I'm acting on everything that I was advised to do. I spoke to one of the psychologists or psychotherapy, not because I want psychological counseling, but I needed an advice. And the advice that he actually asked me a lot of questions. There are some people online here who have a depression or who went through such things. When we just chat on face-to-face or as friends, they tell me, like, even I remember it was, who was this lady? I forgot, one of the ladies who came as a guest, mentioned something of that sort from Scotland. I don't know who was that, if you remember. She mentioned that she went through that phase going to a counselor, and the counselor was saying, tell me every day. So she was the one talking, and she felt like this is not helping. But what I'm trying to say is, at times, when you see your weak points, or when you see some things that are troubling you, when you need help, or maybe even before you seek help, maybe you're talking to your close friends or close family or the faith leaders, you get more vulnerable. You feel like, with me, sometimes before even I go deeper into what I want to say to somebody, maybe something happened to somebody else and somebody says, we Africans don't do that. We can't do that. We Christians don't do that. If you do this, you are not that Christian. So, such things at times, they hold people back. They hold you. And you find that you are the only one. The person is enjoying yourself. You are bound. You are not being yourself. But as I'm saying this, I'm on a journey at the moment. I've learned a lot. And I'm on a journey that I'm doing things for myself. And I believe since I took that step that we've been talking about, that go into yourself, self-love, and live for the presence, live in the presence. It helped me to see that, seeking help or talking about your weaknesses, that doesn't mean that you are not an African, or you are not strong, or you are this, you are that. So I'm just encouraging others that, please forgive me as a person. If I say things to you, you don't know what I'm going through, or you don't know my weaknesses are not your weaknesses. So bear with me and forgive me, and let all of us be ourselves, and we can get help. That's the way we can get help. Thank you.
Absolutely, Queen. And this is what I was talking about earlier on with some of these cultural pieces that may not serve us. I mean, you speaking out doesn't take anything of your African-ness away from you. As a matter of fact, that was one of the things that we're losing, those conversational pieces. That's why we're not talking to each other. There's no nana anymore. Those of you from Ghana may understand what I'm talking about. All right. We've got, just 5 minutes. I want to go to Rox. I want to go to Ricky. And I would love to hear from Millie, because you deal in this area. Rox, you go first. Your hand was up.
Hi, everybody. I'll be very quick so others can get in. I just wanted to say, these last 2 sessions have been absolutely brilliant, because we've been talking about having a safe space where people can talk. And I think Ricky mentioned that, it takes confidence to talk. I would say it takes also courage, and it is an act of self-love. But just listening to everybody's perspectives, I just wanted to say it's a brilliant space, and I think we need to have a session 3 and 4 on the state of the mind, because I think you've only just touched the tip of it. And I've loved the technical aspects, because to me, in the last session, I just felt like we're getting a brain mobility training. You get physical mobility training, but we're getting rehab in the brain that helps us to recondition ourselves. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll give you Thumbs up for that one. Thank you. So sessions 3 and 4 next week, right? Okay. I may have some of you contribute on Thursday next week then. May have a panel of experts. How does that sound? That sounds good, right? Okay, so Sister Millie, Auntie Millie. Oh, how are you this morning? I know you work in this field of mental health. Could you help us how we could potentially think better and maybe observe some of our emotions and manage them better, and stuff that we can't change, we can change us to manage and accept what is what? How do we do this, Millie? You just need to be unmuted, please.
Hi, big
Morning.
question. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Yeah, I've been listening, and I've heard about like the church perspective, some of the cultural things about not being that, and about various labels that people can have. I've been working in the mental health field for over 20 years in different locations with different people. But what I think I find is about treating people the way I would like to be treated. Should I be depressed or, you know, anxious or things like that? And I think one of the things I've learned is patience. Sometimes people want a quick fix, you know, I'm down, fix me now, and whatever. But sometimes people need to go through a process themselves, yes, to come to their own conclusions, to come to their own understandings in order to move forward. At the moment, we've been in lockdown for a number of weeks. There's a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen when we go back. My own organisation, what's happened is we've been trying to keep in touch with people, and ensuring that people have contact, because, you know, as someone said, quite a lot of people live on their own, and, you know, under ordinary circumstances, they'd be able to get out, they'd be able to go to places, they'd be able to seek help and so on. They, you know, and my colleague, who is a psychotherapist, she has been doing a lot of work from home, and now she's going back 2 days a week and working from home, and then another day in our organisation. And it's about being flexible at this time, and learning new skills in how we work with people. You know, some people have said Zoom calls are very exhausting. They can't cope with all the Zoom calls. Some people can't cope with the technology and what have you. But I think for myself, this time I've used it to try to relearn some of the things that I need to learn. Yes, I need to go back to square one. Why am I doing this job that I do? Why do I want to take these things forward? You know, I don't know what the situation is going to be in Croydon. We've heard about lots of cuts, lots of jobs going, redundancies and so on. We're being told that mental health is this huge thing that's going to happen for people. But I think for each person, you need to prepare yourself to do the best that you can. I also am a Christian. I do go to church, and quite often when things are happening, I keep quiet and I listen to what other people are saying. But for me, it's about being supportive and moving forward. I shared some time ago that the 2 people I lost, I was encouraged by my mentor to honour them. And I did this by, you know, paying for 2 people to do a particular health course. And I'm hearing what, you know, the benefits that have done for them. Reason being, one of the people has suffers with cancer condition, breast cancer. And I knew that she needed to be taken out of the sick cancer mode into another mode, something else that she could actually learn and develop and so on. The other person, as I said, she has also got her challenges, but, you know, I'm checking in with her and finding out that things are moving. So it's not always just a talking. There might be other ways of enabling people to move forward. Thanks.
Absolutely, Millie. Thank you. Thank you for your contribution. You know, Millie, if you keep speaking like that, we might need to have you on the panel. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. Ricky, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mike. And just very quickly, as just something that really came to mind as I was listening to everybody's really insightful and constructive input, was that whilst we are all on a journey of getting better and being better in our physical well-being and our mental well-being and our spiritual well-being too, is that it's just a reminder that you can only give what you have. And what I mean by that is, I mean, there's a saying from a good book that, you know, gold and silver I have none, but that which I have got I can give to you. So I think it's really important that we take some time to ask ourselves, what actually do we have? Because if all we have is fear, or if all we do have is worry, or if all we do have is anxiety, then that's what the other person, that's what's going to be received by the other person. Whereas on the other hand, you know, we're in a place where we are calm, perhaps we're at peace, we're happy, then that is what we can give, because that is what we have. So I think it's just an important reminder, a bit like when you get on a plane, I guess, you know, they do the drill, this health and safety drill, you know, they get you to put your mask on. They say, you know, you first and then your kids. And I think it's important that we're reminded that it's actually important. And I think Millie said it, Rox just mentioned it. Also Fiona, about that thing about self-love. It's important to love ourselves as we would intend to love others, because that will be a reflection of what we can give. So yeah, so I just hope that, you know, on the journey over the next couple of days of the week, that we'll take some time to reflect and ask ourselves, actually, what am I transmitting? And is that thing the thing I really want to transmit?
Brilliant. Well said, Rick. There's that saying, hurt people, whole people, heal people. And sometimes we're in the middle of both of those spaces, and we're never perfect. We're always journeying and trying to be better. I really do value the comments, and what we're doing now, ladies and gentlemen, is recording these sessions so that you can review them, because I think there's a lot of information here that is useful. I like what Habib has just said. I was always taught to get up and dust off and keep it moving. I'm now stopping to do the work on myself. Who am I without other people's judgment? I reckon most black men from the Caribbean certainly heard that. Don't cry, get up, keep it moving, right? And what has it made us? I don't know. Perhaps insensitive. Your comments. Listen, everyone, stay safe. Think well, live well, be well. See you on Tuesday, right? Have a wonderful weekend.